Welcome to Garden Talk. We are back in Bayfield for Bayfield in Bloom. And as you can hear, we have a great live audience for today's show. I'm Larry Mealer, of course, and glad to have you back with us for WPR Garden Talk and the News Network. And we have three guests for you today. So we're welcoming back Bruce Spagenberg, UW Extension Statewide Horticulture Outreach Specialist. Bruce, raise your hand. And I hope you heard that as you were listening. His hand went up. Paul Segan is the DNR Forest Health Specialist in Hayward. Paul, welcome back.
Great to be here, Larry. Thank you.
And Phil Broch. Phil is the co-owner of Bayfield Winery and Blue Ox Cider. And Phil, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Great to have all three of them here. And if you have a question or comment, I hope you'll join in with your gardening questions. We'll get questions and comments from our live audience, but we'd also love to have you call us. The number is 800-642-1234. 800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org. You know, before we ask some specific questions about what you're doing in gardening, I'd like to have you talk a bit about your jobs. Paul, tell us what you do as a DNR Forest Health Specialist.
Yeah, it's pretty much my dream job, Larry. I've worked to get here, and I love my job. I get to help people with their trees when it all sums up. A lot of people seek information about their forests, about their yard trees, and they call or they email me, and they ask questions about how they can keep their trees healthy or remedy issues that they're seeing. I also help, foresters manage forests at the population level and try to maintain healthy forests and combat the effects of insect pests and diseases that kind of compromise the long-term health of these forests.
So many things that you do relating to trees, I guess from the roots to the leaves, all the way from top to bottom.
The trees have an extensive anatomy, so we have to consider all different venues of the tree.
Oh, man. Well, Bruce, your title has changed. Since you were last up here anyway, you and I have talked since then, but what are your job responsibilities now?
Yeah, prior to this, last year at this time, I was in Iron County as a county horticulture educator. Now I'm in a statewide position. I work out of Price County. And the main things I'm working with, content is one of the things in my job description. Basically looking at our website and a lot of our articles and publications on there that were written some 20, 30 years ago, going through all those, seeing if they're still accurate, what needs to be updated, what needs to be replaced. And I also work with a broad area we call plant health advising, plant healthcare advising, both in-house and external, working with a variety of things. I also write a weekly column on our website, and it's in about 35 papers around the state right now, too.
Yeah, so you're pretty busy, too, as is Phil. Phil, you got a couple of hats to wear as the co-owner of a winery and cider-making business.
Yeah, we have a small farm outside of Bayfield here where we have about 8 acres of grapes, cold hardy wine grapes, near 30 acres of apples now, and then about an acre of pears. And then we harvest those to turn into wines and hard ciders.
Do you sell any directly, the apples or the pears and so forth?
We don't. Everything we use gets pressed and into our tanks and then into bottles for us, and then we sell right off our farm for the most part.
But you know a whole lot about varieties and all of the growing needs of all of those for sure.
Definitely. There's a lot of different, especially apples, there's so many different varieties that you can use for hard cider, and a lot of times we're finding wild ones too in the county forest here, and lots of fun to play with.
Okay. Well, again, you can join in. The number to call, 800-642-1234, or email to talk@wpr.org. And, of course, our audience, if you have a question, just raise your hand, and Jill will be around with a microphone for you. Paul, spongy moths were a big problem last year. Are we going to see a repeat this year?
Yeah, that's a good question, Larry. Let's give a little historic context. We started to see an outbreak around 2022, and this really correlated to the drought conditions we were seeing across the state. Fortunately, we had an abundant amount of frequent rainfall last spring, 2024. So even though we did have a big outbreak here in 2024, we saw a tremendous amount of population decline in spongy moth last year. And so the amount of eggs that were getting laid was really low at the end of the season. So we're very optimistic that the outbreak across most of the state has declined and we won't see a whole lot of activity. Having said that, we are expecting some localized area of heavy defoliation possible in northeast Wisconsin like Marinette County and down in south central like Sauk County around the Dells area and Baraboo. In some of those areas, the DNR is doing aerial spray applications in some of the state parks. But landowners should remain cautious with spongy moth in some of those areas and think about some of the controls that they can implement for individual yard trees. It's also worth noting that some of the effects of spongy moth are going to take some time to remedy. This drought, the spongy moth, some other defoliators, they cause stress on trees that doesn't immediately reverse. And it can take several years for these oaks particularly to kind of come out of that stress. And so close monitoring of tree crown condition, things like dieback, things like undersized leaves, can be really important. Watering trees during periods of dry weather this summer can go a long way to keep them in a healthy state and reverse some of these effects.
And it's been kind of dry so far this year in the north, has it not?
It has. We are still in an abnormally dry condition throughout much of that kind of northwest band of the state, though it has eased quite a bit, this drought, as of about the start of April. And that's a good sign. It looks like maybe we'll come out of drought this season, maybe by June or July, and that would be great. But yes, we have to think about some of those longer term effects. But the outlook does seem good at this point.
That's great. Phil, maybe you could talk about the grapes you use with your in your winemaking.
Yeah, so we're using all cold hardy varieties. They're hybrid grapes that were developed either through the University of Minnesota. There's also some private breeders, Elmer Swanson, Tom Plocker, that are doing different breeding programs. We're using, on our farm, we have different whites and reds, like Marquette and Frontenac are some of the more well-known ones.
Yeah.
They cross them with cold hardy varieties that were already native to the U.S., and so a lot of times it's 4 or 5 different grapes that were used in the breeding process, but like with Marquette, Pinot Noir is one of the parents, grandparents, I'm not sure exactly where it lines up in that. So you get some similar flavors, but they're used to grow in a colder region. They can handle winters, some of them down to -30. And then they also have a lot of nice disease resistance, which we love too, so we're not having to go out and really spray much on those.
They bring something a little. I think the cold weather grapes bring something to the wine that maybe the other grapes don't.
Yeah, I believe our long term now that each year we're kind of experimenting. This is our 4th season now running the place. We're going to be leaning heavy into sparkling wines. I think it's very good for this region. It's not my idea. We've heard it from webinars and other places. But with sparkling grapes, you're picking those, in France they're picking those early to get a little lower sugar, higher acid. You want that crispness with a sparkling wine. And in our region, especially where we are in Bayfield, if it's a short season, that's our problem. It's almost, there's sometimes too much acid, but it lends itself well to sparkling wines. So then we can stop fighting nature and kind of work with it.
Work with it. Makes sense to me, and I like sparkling wine.
Me too. I love bubbles.
Bruce, you wrote an article for your weekly column. What was the title? Wisconsin Lawn and Garden was the title of your column, but you talked about using annuals in our landscapes. What would we share a little of that with us?
Yeah, I just sometimes the annuals get overlooked, but because you have to replant them every year. But the flexibility, you can change your color scheme, do what you want with them. And of course, if you're using hanging baskets, which are getting more and more popular, that's typically the plant you're going to go with. So yeah, it was just a general column on selection, care, and.
Well, my perennials, even though I thought I had them planted so that they would bloom at different times and bloom early, they don't bloom as early as I'd like them to bloom, and so we get a lot of annuals in pots and so forth to brighten up the front.
Yeah, it's a great way to supplement your perennials, and you don't have to limit the containers to just being on your porch or hanging off of the deck or whatever. You can put them out in the yard. You can put in containers on the ground as well as hanging baskets and do a lot of flexibility.
Well, let's take a call. Bruce in Lake Geneva has a question, I believe. Let's go there. Hi, Bruce.
Actually, it's Phil, but that's okay.
Go ahead.
No problem. I have 2 peach trees. Contender is one of them, and anyhow, the leaves are turning a burnt orange, crimson orange, and wrinkling almost wart-like. And they're the second year in the ground, so they're new. And of course, the cicadas and the deer weren't kind to them last year, but they survived. But I'm wondering what's going on with these leaves and how to what's going on and how to remedy the situation.
Okay, Phil, any ideas?
Very little, maybe, because we don't grow many peaches up this far north. But things it sounds like it could be to look into. There's some similar notes with apples, with fire blight, or even some cedar rust. If you said it was kind of that orange, I'm not sure if it gets affected the same way with peaches as it does apples. But I know the University of Minnesota's website has a lot of great info on cold hardy peaches. That would be where I would start with that.
Yeah, what about,
Yeah.
go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I'd say peach leaf curl would be the biggest concern, and it fits the description. And the best suggestion there would be to take a sample, use our plant clinic with Dr. Death, you're well familiar with,
Yeah.
Brian Huddleston, to confirm it. You know, it could be weather related as well. You know, peaches, the flower buds are not as hardy as the tree. And we did have considerably colder weather this past winter. We kind of overlooked that, but it was more normal, but the last 4 or 5 years have not been normal. So that's another thing. It could have been damage to the buds.
Makes good sense. And thanks very much for calling, Bill. Appreciate your call. Raquel in southeast Minnesota emailed to say they have a 5-year-old plum tree, or plum trees, I guess, that appear to be dying. Bark is falling off, and there are trails similar to emerald ash borer. And wondering if, could it be the emerald ash borer? Paul, go ahead.
No, I don't think it's emerald ash borer. We know that that only affects species in the Fraxinus, or the ash group, as well as white fringe trees. So I'm thinking it's some kind of flat-headed borer, though, possibly a domestic cousin of emerald ash borer that's causing those winding, tunneling effects underneath the bark. But I'm not sure what would be affecting peach, but it's probably some buprestid, a type of beetle like EAB.
Yeah.
Peach, well, we just
Bruce, go ahead. Yeah.
We just call it peach tree borer, which is prevalent. It does get into plums as well, but it does the same thing as emerald ash borer. It burrows under the bark, and you get all the tunnels. And
Yeah.
at that point, not much you can do if the bark's already coming off.
They get other names too when an owner finds them. Which we won't talk about right now here on Garden Talk. It's great to have our 3 guests, Paul Segan, DNR Forest Health Specialist, Phil Brosh, co-owner of Bayfield Winery and Blue Ox Cider, and Bruce Spagenberg, UW Extension Statewide Horticulture Outreach Specialist. I'm Larry Mueller for Garden Talk on WPR News. Great to have you with us here for Garden Talk. Larry Mueller here, and we are broadcasting from Bayfield, Wisconsin, to celebrate Bayfield in Bloom. It's a wonderful event that goes on for quite a while. It's not just one day, for sure. It's like a month or so where you would have a chance to really come up and see some of the beautiful lawns and gardens and trees and orchards that are in existence here, along with plenty of other things as well. We have a great audience today. I want to give a shout out. We have 25 students here from Superior Middle School, and their teacher, Andrea Moreau. Andrea, if you can get any of those middle schoolers to raise a question, well, we'd love to hear them, what they might have to ask about. And of course, you can ask your question as well. Number 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. And of course, the audience, just raise your hand and Jill will be around. I have a call next from Tamara in Ashland. Hi, Tamara.
Hello there, Larry. This is Mara. And my uncle and their oldest would say, trim your trees when your tools are sharp and clean. And I have an oak tree that is having some branches that I want to know if they're alive or dead and should I trim them. And then cedar trees, they just keep going and going. They're amazing. The tree of life, right?
Yeah, they are. They are indeed. Paul?
So I heard oak tree, and I heard pruning of oak trees, and
Yeah.
it's a great idea to prune oak trees to promote better architecture and branch habit in the oak trees, but there's an important disease to be aware of when we're pruning oak trees, and that's oak wilt. It's becoming widespread across much of the state and more common in northern Wisconsin, and so we really want to avoid any pruning, wounding, or injury to oaks during that time frame of April through July, and even best to wait till the end of October to do any pruning. So it sounds like she said pointy leaves, that's red oak. That would be a red oak member, and those are highly susceptible to oak wilt. Yeah, but prune away as long as you can do it outside of that time frame.
That means don't do it now.
That means wait right now. And, you know, she mentioned some dieback in the oak too, and that's a really common observation that we're seeing. Parts of the southeast in Wisconsin, parts of northwest Wisconsin, where spongy moth and drought effects have been very acute, are starting to cause decline of oak, dieback, mortality. And so we don't really want to pull the plug on those oaks until we can monitor and see that they might recover, because some of this is very reversible. So if you see dead branches, wait a little bit longer here. Oaks can be slow to leaf out, and you'll get a better picture by the middle of the season of the overall crown health. When the crown loses about 40 to 50% of the live leaves, it usually is not a great prognosis for recovery in the future. So it's kind of your threshold. But if it's got more than 40% of the live leaves by midsummer, that tree might recover.
So what can we be proactive? I mean, what can we do to be a little more proactive with the oaks?
Yeah, cultural treatments in the yard are very important. Things like mulching around the tree, around the drip line, maybe 5-6 feet out even. It seems far, but a large established tree can really benefit from that mulch. And then watering. Anytime, you know, if you look at the historic average of the amount of precipitation we would receive in Wisconsin, it would be about an inch of rain per week during that period of about May through October. And so watering after a couple weeks of dry weather to about an inch of rain, which approximates to about half a gallon per square foot around that drip line, can be really helpful in keeping the tree healthy and fend off some of the opportunistic insects and diseases that might go after it.
Yeah. I was just looking to see. I thought Bruce was going to jump in.
No, I was just going to add what he was saying about avoiding problems. The big thing we see a lot of with oak trees in particular, someone buys a nice parcel and they build a home on it and they do a lot of work around the tree, soil fill over the roots, digging around the trees, and keep in mind that whole drip line, like Paul mentioned, the roots go well beyond the trunk, and the mistake a lot of people make is they put a snow fence around the trunk and they ignore the whole root zone and they drive equipment over it and they dig on it, put fill on it. And a lot of the effects, like you were talking about, you're going to see it 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, not right away. So, and it's sad when you see it, and at that point, you can't reverse it. So.
All good points. We have a question from the audience. Hi.
Hi. What are some invasive species to be aware of when planting plants or just having plants in your yard?
All right. Invasive insects. I'm sorry, did I get that wrong?
Yeah, just invasive plants or insects.
Oh, invasive plants.
Plants or insects.
Okay.
Either one or both.
Yeah, we could talk all day about invasive species, but that's an excellent question. And one of the big things would be starting out when you're purchasing plants and you're choosing plants, get them from a reputable nursery or garden center. Resist the temptation. Certainly don't go out in the wild and dig stuff, and don't necessarily get things from friends or neighbors, because sometimes we see plants that really are now invasive that people were growing. Snow on the mountains is an excellent example. A lot of the invasive lists now you see 20, 30 years ago, we were recommending some of those plants. So stick with, reputable garden centers and nurseries. Look online. There's a lot of great websites the DNR has, Extension has, showing you what plants are invasive. So if you do see them in your yard, you can take steps and dig them up or cut them down as needed.
Very good. Thanks for that question. And do we have another? Well, raise your hand if you have a question. You can give us a call at 800-642-1234. I want to go back to Phil here for a minute. You know, a lot of homeowners like to have apple trees in their gardens. What are some of the best varieties in your mind for the backyard?
There's a few different ways to go about it. It kind of depends on your purpose. If you're looking for good eating apples, a fun way to do it is having either someone do the grafting from a nursery before you or graft onto one tree so you don't have to manage a big orchard, but you can have a few different varieties. And now there's so many disease-resistant varieties too. I'd recommend going that route when planting at your house, just so then, again, not having to fight everything. There's Liberty, Enterprise. There was, what was it, Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana. There's the PRI in Enterprise, and there's a whole series that are all disease-resistant, and they taste great. They don't take as much effort as some of the bigger varieties. Honeycrisp is one that people like to plant. It's finicky. It drives me crazy. Sometimes it's better to just go the easy route and get consistent, healthy apples each year with some of those. So some nurseries I've seen are doing what, I don't know if everybody calls them Franken trees, where each limb's a different variety. You can buy them that way. You can also do it yourself. It's not as hard as it sounds. Keenan, who's at the farm right now, did most of it. But we did 160 trees this year that were top working and putting new varieties on, some disease resistant, some that are better for hard cider. But if you look up the cleft graft, it's a very easy graft. You don't need any fancy tools for it. We have a grafting knife. You can do it with a utility knife. It also says you need grafting tape. You can do it with electrical tape. And then the one that always gets laughs is, instead of the grafting wax, I buy a toilet wax ring at the hardware store for a couple bucks, and it's been lasting 3 years for us now, because it's just sealing in the moisture in the piece of wood that you're attaching to that tree. But the cleft graft is a very, very simple one to get started, and it's low risk. If it doesn't work, you can do it again next year. But we just finished up a couple weeks ago. We always want to do it before the bloom time, which is happening right now up the hill.
Yeah. And cleft graft,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so probably can find on YouTube some examples of how to do it. Do we have any pubs on that publication?
Yeah, I think the UW, the Growing Apples in Your Backyard, is like a 40-page publication that I'm pretty sure there's some diagrams in there as well. But like you say, you can go online and find it.
Yeah, those, I would bet there's a YouTube anymore. You can find just about whatever you want, and a lot of things you probably don't want to see. Well, let's take a call from Peggy next in Chippewa Falls. Peggy, hi, thanks for calling.
Hi, I just turned on the radio, so I'm not sure if this question has been asked or not. But we have a couple northern maples on our boulevard, and I have never seen so many of the helicopter seed pods that we have. In fact, we have more seed pods than we do leaves on the tree. It actually looks like it's dying. But my husband has been placing a drip line on the boulevard for the last several years during the droughts that we've been having, and the trees have leafed out and been beautiful. This year they look skimpy, but all helicopters. I'm just wondering, does that mean that the tree is about to demise, or should we not give up yet?
Well, you guys probably all have a comment on that. Paul, let's start with you.
Yeah, in forest ecology, we call that a distress crop. Usually it means that the tree is under stress and it's sort of a last-ditch effort to try to replace itself with this abundant production of seed. But it doesn't mean the trees are on their way out. We've seen that in the wild. We see it every few years when there's the maples, usually red maple, under stress. And as long as they're watered, as long as the ground area, like Bruce had referenced, is not disturbed, the trees can carry on. There might be some dieback that happens, but they can certainly recover. But watering is a good idea. But I think it's premature to say whether they're going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. the stress is part of it, and some trees just get into weird, we commonly call it biennial bearing. We see it with fruit trees sometimes too, where one year they flower and produce a tremendous amount of seed and fruit, and the next year is almost nothing. So yeah, a lot of things, but certainly don't cut it down. You got to give it several years before you make that decision.
What's the season, or how is the season shaping up here in the northern part of the state, Bruce?
I think we were talking about that before we went on the air. Kind of back to normal, if that's possible, whatever normal is anymore. The spring was pretty good. We had adequate snow. We could have had more. And I know in the southern part of the state got very little snow, so there's still a lot of winter stress. But in the rainfall, we certainly could use more. We've gotten some, but temperature-wise, pretty well. Other than that, 3-4 weeks ago, when we had that 80 degrees. That gets a little concerning that early because we talk about trees leafing out, and then cold weather comes back. But overall, I'd say it's been pretty decent, other than maybe a little bit more rain in some of the areas.
Yeah, probably a little bit of that. And we got another email. How does the freeze and thaw you get in winter affect trees?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of what we call winter burn this year, and it's caused by a variety of things, including really warm days during the late winter, warm sunny days followed by cold nights, and we did see quite a bit of that in April. That can cause loss of moisture in the needles, particularly of conifers, hemlock, pine, yews, arborvitae, and these start to turn brown at the tips. We've seen a big effect of that in northern Wisconsin. But it's usually, we stem it back to weather, and these trees can recover. There's some pruning that can be done if there's dead branches, dead needles. Pruning them out can be a good idea, but waiting until the tree actually has a chance to show what branches are fully dead and which ones are still going to recover. A way to do that is to scratch off that branch that's showing symptoms or that's still brown, and seeing if there's some green tissue on it to know whether or not it's going to make it. If there's some green tissue, it still might bud out. So yeah, winter can have a big effect on trees, but usually we want to wait until we get into June before we make any big decisions on what we're going to do with them.
And Phil, a question for you, are you teaching classes on grafting?
I have only through our Washburn City, or the Washburn High School this spring we did some, so very, very few. But if someone comes out to the farm, we even have a tree, it's a ornamental crab right next to the tasting room where people sit. And we did a few grafts on there this year just so when we do talk to people about it, it's right there so they can see the finished product. But yeah, out at the farm, we always we love interesting conversations and taking people out. And
that's absolutely great. I love that. How's the business doing, by the way?
Good. It's just waking up now. It's always a long winter up here, so it's nice to start seeing people showing up again. And we start our live music season in a couple weeks, and so and everything's in bloom right now, so it's a great time to go around Bayfield.
Bayfield in bloom. There you go. We have another question from our audience.
Hi. My question is, what apples are most commonly used to make wine?
All right.
That's a good question. It varies by what style you're wanting to do. So we have some apple wines, and then we also do hard ciders, and it's a balance of finding enough sugar so that the yeast will convert it into alcohol, and then also that right amount of acid, and not as much in grapes, but there's still tannins in apples, and you want to find that balance of all three of those. So a lot of times it's a wide variety. We have some that have had 30 different varieties in a batch. Usually there's not one perfect apple, at least that grows up here, that will have all of those, but it's fun to play around and blend with them all anyways and taste it as it goes.
And thank you very much for that question. Let's take another question from the audience.
Hello. I have what I'm going to call Italian cypress. And after this winter, they were doing great last year. After this winter, they're all brown spotting now. and I'm not sure what to do with them. It started with one, and now I've got about 6 in my yard, and now they're all brown spotting. One has died completely, and they're my babies. I would love to know how to protect them.
Yeah, so what percentage of the green has turned brown on these cypress?
It would be, of the whole tree, I would say, it's spotted throughout the tree. The trees are only about 6 foot tall right now. They're only two or 3 years old. And I would say maybe, oh golly, if you sprinkled sugar on a apple pie, that's about how much I've got.
Yeah. My guess is with this winter condition and then these kind of cold stretches we've had in April, which can be really hard on these trees, is that you did have some winter burn, but that can also be followed by a couple of fungal diseases. The Phylosticta, Phomopsis are two that can infect those types of evergreens. And so I would say making sure that the spacing of these plants is such that there's good air circulation, that's really good. Also, some of these diseases that can move in after winter burn, they take up residence in the fallen needles or tissue that ends up on the ground. So raking and keeping that site clean can be really important. And then eventually pruning out those dead branches and making sure that you do that during dry weather so as to not spread the fungal spores around. And then clean the cutting shears afterward is a good idea. But probably give it a little bit of time to make sure you know which has died and which hasn't. During dry weather, prune some of that stuff out.
And let's take a call from Christine in Chippewa Falls. Hi, Christine.
Hi, thanks a lot. My question is about mountain ash. So I tried to purchase a native mountain ash from my yard, and the local reputable nursery didn't have the native, but they did have a Cardinal Royal mountain ash, which I did plant. My question is, what about these varieties off of native? And secondly, fortunately, there are baby native mountain ash on my home property here. I would like to put them in. I would like to, encourage them for growth. They're in the ground. I'm thinking this is the time you're just to let them grow and maybe move them into a better area when they're dormant, early spring. And secondly, some of the balsam here have this funky light green growth like it's on steroids. So question on the balsam. Thank you.
Okay, I think I could get us started with the mountain ash. We got a question earlier about what types of invasive trees or plants to avoid in the landscape when you're planting or buying from nurseries. And one of them that stands out is actually European mountain ash. It's one that we found is quite invasive in parts of northern Wisconsin and up on the North Shore in Minnesota. That is Acaparia, Sorbus acaparia is the Latin name if you can read the label on it. But if it's a European mountain ash, probably not a good selection for the yard. And if you find that that's what it is, and maybe some of those volunteer sprouts that are growing around are that too, that might not be a plant you really want to encourage. You want to more look for the native mountain ash. As to the balsam fir and having a little bit of a pea-colored green or chlorosis, it's possibly could be herbicide damage that often can express itself, or soil nutrient deficiencies often express themselves as chlorosis. So I suppose a soil test might be in order if they're recent plantings to make sure you can get your soil chemistry right at that site.
Yeah, Bruce, you were going to add to that as well, I believe.
Yeah, she mentioned funky growth.
Yeah, it was funky.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times what that's telling you is there's a hormone imbalance in the plant for some reason. Mites can do that. Some insects can do that. The weather could do it. So if that progresses, you might want to consider sending some pictures to us. We have the Ask a Gardener on our website. You can submit photos. We also have our insect diagnostic clinic and our disease diagnostic clinics available. So depending on how severe that is, if it's 1 or 2 branches or tips, I wouldn't be that concerned, but if it's really continues to increase, then I'd take some steps to get it.
Yeah. All right. Let's take another question from the audience.
This has more to do with the lawn. We have a row of pines and then a row of balsams and then 2 huge oak trees, but the lawn is bad. It's just like dying out. It just needs something, I guess.
Probably needs a different kind of grass.
Yeah, that's a tip. trying to grow decent lawn under trees is a struggle. So start with the grass we suggest would be the fine fescues. There's a bunch of them. We just collectively call them fine fescue. You may want to have a soil test done. That's something we always mention as a good starting point when plants are struggling. It could be the pH is out of line, which wouldn't be unusual. Although most turf grasses are pretty adaptable, but it still would be worth your time to get a soil test done. And then reseed it with a fine fescue, which you can get in the shade mixes available in garden centers. And then once that grass is up, mow it high, set your mower as high as it'll go for the shade, and fertilize it less. The common mistake people make is they fertilize more in the shade thinking the plant needs it. It's actually the opposite with turf. You fertilize less in the shade, it will do better than if you fertilize more.
All right, good answers all. And let's take another question from the audience.
Hello. I have like 10 or 12 mature spruce trees in my yard. They're big trees. And I've lost like 2 or 3 of them. I noticed the needles getting thinner and thinner over 2 or 3, maybe 4 years time, and then they completely die. I'm just wondering if that's just old age, or is there some kind of disease or critter that's getting them?
Yeah, one of the most common issues with old spruce, even young spruce, is this disease called Rhizosphere needlecast. There's a few different needlecast diseases, but ultimately these are fungal diseases that kill the needles and cause them to cast or fall off. And it then spreads through either rain splash or through wind to the adjacent spruce. And it's very common to see older spruce that have very thin crowns that usually started to thin from the bottom of the crown or the inside and move outward or upward. And that's a sign that Rhizosphere or some other needlecast is probably very prevalent in that tree. Large trees are very difficult to control with that condition, so proper watering, mulching are the best you can hope for. Thinning branches, if the tree's manageable, if you can thin a little bit, promote good air circulation, clean up dead needles around the tree, that can sort of slow down the progression. But often if it's really advanced, there's not a lot of hope in really managing it well.
All right, thank you very much for that question. We have another one from the audience.
Hi, I'd like to get back on grafting. I'm wondering, can you take, say, an apple tree and add plums or cherries to that tree, and what is the best host grafting tree?
Okay, Phil?
So you'll want to stay apple to apple, pear to pear. I don't even remember. There's one that goes from apple to pear. I'm not sure which one it is, but I would stay within the same fruit. And really, it's for apple trees. Most of them are going to be good host trees for them. You don't have to really worry about the variety. We've even done it with some wild volunteers that are popping up in different spots and tried different experiments, because we have a huge area that used to have a lot of apple pumice, so there's a thicket of apple trees, and sometimes we'll graft onto those. So if it's a healthy apple tree on the bottom, and another way, if you wanted to start a new tree and do it cheaply, you can order rootstock and graft your own tree. So every tree's already been grafted from the nursery, but you can do it. We've done it before. You order different types of rootstock for the size, the cold hardiness, disease resistance, and then you can put on whichever variety you'd like on there.
Yeah. All right, thanks for that question, and we will take some more questions coming up right now, but just a quick reminder, we are broadcasting from Bayfield, Wisconsin, the Bayfield Pavilion, celebrating Bayfield in bloom. We've been doing it, I think, for 23 years. This year is the 23rd year with our 3 guests, Paul Segan, Phil Broch, and Bruce Spangenberg, and I'm Larry Mueller, and you are listening to WPR News. You're listening to Garden Talk. Larry Mueller here. Great to have you along today as we visit with Bruce Spangenberg, Bruce is Extension Statewide Horticulture Outreach Specialist. Phil Broch is co-owner of Bayfield Winery and Blue Ox Cider, and Paul Segan, DNR Forest Health Specialist in Hayward. Questions for them, give a call. The number's 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. And before we go to the phones, let's take a question from the audience.
Hello. I have a question about mulch for organic vegetable gardens. This is a raised garden in a community plot in Minocqua. What is your best suggestion for organic type of mulch. I usually use like straw. I just buy a hay, or, straw bale, but I can get cranberry mulch as well, and I'm kind of debating about that.
Bruce, you got an idea? Well, any of you would have. Let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the straw is the typical for vegetable crops, and if you can find it weed seed free, let me know, because I don't know if it exists. But the cranberry mulch might be an option. The main concern, if you're following organic guidelines, is to make sure that the source of the mulch was not treated with pesticides. That's your biggest concern. The other thing you keep in mind, which should fit into organic guidelines, if you're growing warm season crops like tomatoes, melons, black plastic mulch is another option for you. It'll speed up the season, especially for us in the northern part of the state.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in, Paul?
I always collect my grass clippings and spread that. I think that's a good source of nitrogen and some leaching of some of those nutrients as it rains and it turns a little brown. I always think about nitrogen if you were to ever work in some of that mulch, because it can cause a short-term period of nitrogen deficiency. So if it's top dressed, just spread on the surface, usually not a problem. But yeah, if you're working it in, be aware of the nitrogen issue that could happen.
Yeah. Phil, any?
We should be doing more of it on our farm, but time-wise, we're not always getting everything mulched. But we're using a lot of times just kind of rough compost that's still kind of halfway done. And but yeah, we're much more wild at our place.
Well, Phyllis in Minnesota, Winnetonka, I think, or maybe Winona, Minnesota. Phyllis, you have a question?
I do. I've been trying to identify a tree, which I see frequently around here, and I often see them in cemeteries too. They're a tall evergreen tree. They look like they might be some kind of arborvitae, but they have multiple trunks coming up together. So there will be 2 or 3 or 4. They get quite tall. They're fairly narrow and pointed at the top. I like them very much. I'd like to buy some, but I don't know what they are.
Well, we got a couple of, at least 2 people with ideas. Bruce?
Yeah, I think she already identified it. Arborvitae or white cedar, which
Yeah.
there are cultivars that are tall, 20, 30 feet. There's cultivars that are 1.5 feet tall and round shaped. So excellent choice. The main concern is they're a favorite food of deer. So if you got deer around, you won't have any branches in the first 6 or 7 feet. So.
All right, let's take a question from the audience. Hi.
Hi, I have a question. What kind of recommended plants would you recommend for beginner planters?
Okay, now flowers or vegetables or?
Any plants.
Any plants. Well, there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, if you want to start out with vegetable crops, something like bush beans are very easy to grow. Cucumbers are easy to grow. Carrots are easy to grow. As far as not having a lot of problems relatively. Flower-wise, marigolds have been a tradition. Petunias, zinnias. The main thing you want to do. A lot of those plants are easy to grow, but do a little research and see if they need sun or shade. That's the biggest concern, especially with flowering plants. And most vegetables won't do well in the shade, but there's a lot of plants that, if you're looking for something in the shade, like coleus, there's all different varieties of coleus out there with different colors that are easy to grow. So just match your site to, sun or shade, and then pick the plants that you like.
I always like to have a cherry tomato plant right outside my back door. And then when you're coming, you park the car and you're going by, you just pick a couple off, and there you go.
Snack away.
Snack away. I do that all the time. Let's see. We have another question from the audience, so let's take that.
Here's a question about an evergreen tree. When the students from the Hurley School go out to the garden and they're planting their seeds and they look up at this beautiful 45-foot evergreen tree, they are enamored by this cool thing up there. Is it an eagle's nest? Is it a squirrel's nest? And I was just wondering, do you have a real fun explanation of what that is that I could relay back to them?
Well, if it, white pine are very commonly selected by bald eagles and other eagles that put their nests in. And so I often see big nests and big towering white pine that have a splayed out crown. But if it's a spruce, I'm not sure. Is it? It's a witch's broom. Okay.
Oh, witch's broom. Witch's broom?
Yes, witch's broom. I believe that can be caused by a number of different things. Bacteria, fungus can cause that, but it is pretty cool growth to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically, it goes back to I mentioned earlier about hormones. When you get either a bacteria or an insect or something started in there, the plant growth essentially is responding to that and giving you weird, the witch's brooming, or the other big thing you see a lot in the woods are the burls on the trunk of the tree. Which become very valuable for making bowls and stuff later. But because you're talking about something that's there all the time, versus it's probably mistletoe is another possibility. Do you see that much at all in the forest?
Yeah, mistletoe more so in black spruce, like in a bog setting. But sometimes I see white pine with these big, growths of mistletoe.
All right, more questions from the audience. That's great. Let's take another one.
Hi. You mentioned earlier about cleaning pruners after you use them. What's the process for that? Like just run it underwater? Is there some solution you put?
Yeah, generally it's recommended to use a 70% alcohol solution or a 10% bleach, and to soak that pruner in that substance, that liquid, and then give it about 30 seconds in there, and then kind of wipe it off, and then go to your next branch.
So it's a little more involved. I mean, you do have to wait a little bit.
Yeah, you do want to disinfect it, so sometimes a little slower than you might want to do it.
Yeah. Okay, another question from the audience.
We live south of Washburn, a couple miles, and have an area that has a nice population of ash trees, and I guess 4, 6, 8 inches in diameter. And I guess I'm wondering who's going to last the longest, me or the trees?
So unfortunately, emerald ash borer is becoming very widespread in Bayfield and Douglas County and much of Wisconsin, and so we don't expect these trees are going to last much longer. EAB is very efficient at killing a high percentage of the ash, perhaps 99%, and it can kill trees as small as about the size of your wrist. So there will be a few within a forest that might make it, but overall in the next 10 years, we are going to see a lot of decline and a lot of mortality of ash. And so I would encourage, if you do own an acreage, to have it looked at by a professional forester, to do a walkthrough and consider what some of the management options might be, because there might be other non-ash species that could grow back. There might be advanced regeneration of non-ash that can really repopulate that forest and make it productive again.
I was thinking back to elm trees. I can remember as a young guy riding with the folks down streets that were completely lined with elm trees, and of course they all went away. And this last week, I was playing at a golf tournament in Canada, and in Saskatoon, Canada. When I first started going to that tournament, I was amazed because elm trees were lining every single street. And now some of those are a little bit of climate change going on, and those elm bark beetles, and
Yeah, it's an era. I was just a kid when that was going on, so I barely remember those towering elms lining the street, but most of them are gone now. The good news with elm is that there's been quite a lot of work to start to produce and make available at the retail nursery level a lot of resistant types of varieties of elm. And so elm can be a very viable tree to plant back in the landscape. Many of those selections have been selected for resistance to Dutch elm disease. So that's a good thing. And we hope that same situation with ash. In time, there will be varieties of ash that are determined to have some resistance and can be reintroduced into the landscape.
I'm just looking at my clock here and seeing that we're coming up to the top of the hour. We will be taking a quick break to take a look at the news. We'll find out what else is in store for us here on the Talk Network, and we'll be back. I'm Larry Mueller. Welcome to Garden Talk. Larry Mealer here, and we are broadcasting live from Bayfield to celebrate Bayfield in Bloom. You know, with a great live audience. I'll tell you what, it's so much fun to see so many people with a packed house here. And Bayfield in Bloom, I did want to mention before I forget about it, is that it's going on throughout the week. The Blessings of the Fleet takes place on Sunday at 1 o'clock, and then on Saturday, June 7th, there are tours of Bayfield area gardens. And you know, the best way, I think, is probably to go online to bayfield.org. If you go to bayfield.org, you're going to find out all the details, because you're going to be able to see a lot of wonderful gardens, some orchards, and right now, you're going to have a chance to ask questions of our three guests. Paul Segan, DNR Forest Health Specialist from Hayward. Phil Broch is co-owner of Bayfield Winery and Blue Ox Cider. And Bruce Spagenberg, been with us many times as well, UW Extension State Horticulture Outreach Specialist. So great to have them all here. And lines are filling up. The number to call, 800-642-1234. You can email to talk@wpr.org. And we're going to go back to our audience for some questions.
Yes, good afternoon. We live in the Green Bay area, and I noticed in the yard the last 2 years we're getting just an abundance of ground thistle. And I don't know if it's because of the climate or what, but and it has the sharp needles on it, of course, and stuff. Is there anything that's going on with this thistle that seems to be taking over?
Bruce.
There's several species of thistle. I mean, some are biennial, some are perennial. It's hard to say. I'm not aware of anything going on specifically, but usually when that kind of thing happens, there was some event, you know, maybe an unusual seed set or some materials moved around or something, and then this is in your lawn you're talking about, or just, yeah. Okay, so in the lawn, when you get broadleaf weeds like that, we're going to assume they're probably perennial. So either you're going to dig them out, which is going to be a chore, or you could use the appropriate broadleaf herbicide, and probably the material that's going to work the best on thistle would contain the active ingredient trichlor, which you get in garden centers. And a lot of times it's mixed with other herbicides as well. Early fall is probably the best time to apply that herbicide, like September. And then work on getting your lawn thicker so the weeds don't have a chance to come back. But it's hard to say exactly why they got started, but I'm not aware of any unusual problem on turf or thistles, you know, something new that's come about.
Okay. Let's take another question from the audience, and then we'll take a phone call or two.
Hi, I am part of a blueberry co-op in Bayfield, and the past few years, we've been rehabbing an old blueberry farm, cutting back the growth and really pruning the bushes. Last year we had severe mummyberry fungus on pretty much 100% of the plants. So we mulched it, we put pine needles around the base, and we're treating it with urea this year, but I was wondering if you had any recommendations for what we can do for organic practices to keep these bushes healthy.
Okay, Phil, you look like you might have an answer to that, or at least a partial one.
Might is the important word there. So it's mummyberry, from what I understand, is fungal. And one thing, so similar to you, last year we had a lot of fungal issues too, more than we've ever had. It was that wet spring, which, like Paul said, thankfully killed all the spongy moth up here. So I was happy for it. But this year we are using JMS stylet oil. It's an organic product, and it smothers fungicides. You don't need to use much of it. Sometimes they even say one application. And then we're also going, I can't remember if it's called Regalia. It's a thyme oil, and it's antifungal. but it's a biofungicide, so it's nothing that you have to worry about. You can be in the berries after it. There's no time where you have to worry about the chemicals in it. So that's what we're doing, and I would imagine it's kind of a similar situation since we're so close proximity-wise that it's just that wet spring for sure.
Okay, we'll take a call from Ann in Appleton next. Hi, Ann.
Hello. I had a UW Extension garden soil test done, and it showed low nitrogen. So last fall, I placed spent coffee grounds on the soil, and this spring, the irises were all dead, and the alliums did not come up. Please help.
Oh, boy. That might have been the wrong thing to do. The coffee grounds, depending on how thick they were. And Bruce, what are your comments?
Yeah, it could be a variety of things. I think, the coffee grounds could be an issue, but I think the other issue could be the winter, could be some other thing going on. So I think it's kind of a coincidence that you did the soil test and then had these things die. But I guess at this point, with a soil test, was that done specifically for flowers, or did you specify on that?
Well, specifically for vegetables, carrots, tomatoes, and peppers.
Okay. Yeah, because usually on the soil test, nitrogen's not normally what we're testing for. It's usually pH and then phosphorus and potassium are the key things we're looking at. Nitrogen fluctuates so much in the soil. By the time you take your test and then get your results and decide to do something, it's changed. So we pretty much look at nitrogen as an annual kind of thing, and a crop like tomato is going to need more than a crop like carrots. So you need to adjust accordingly, and we have a lot of good information on that on our website as far as specific crops. But getting back to the allium and the, what was the other one that died? The iris. Yeah, I don't, it's hard to say exactly what went on there. It could have been the winter. Some other issue could have been in there. It's kind of a coincidence it all happened at once.
Some of mine didn't come up either.
Yeah, especially in the southern part of the state, we've seen a lot of things this spring that either didn't come back or came back a lot weaker than it was a year ago. The winter is part of that. As Paul's mentioned, also with trees, the same thing happens with shrubs and with perennials. They could have been weaker as a result of a drought the previous year, and then they go into winter weaker. This past winter, especially in the southern part of the state, without a lot of snow, we had sub-zero weather, so we saw a lot of stress on those plants in the winter. They may have been weaker going into the winter. So as a result, they come out of the spring either dead or looking pretty shabby. So.
Okay. And there you go. Thanks very much for calling. Let's take a call from Karen in St. Germain. Hi, Karen.
Hi. I have a lilac tree that I bought 15 or maybe even 20 years ago, and I don't remember where I bought it. But for most trees like that, they're grafted like at the bottom, but this is grafted up high, like right below where the branches, start to branch out. And it is getting old, and I would love to replace it, but I don't remember where I bought this, and I have never seen a lilac tree grafted high like this. And you were talking about grafting a little bit ago, and I don't know what kind of trunk this is grafted onto, but how easy would it be to graft something like this? And was this like a common practice earlier?
As an interesting question, Phil.
I wish I had an interesting answer for it. Again, as you might notice, I have my apple and grape pear blinders, so I don't get outside of that world too often. I wouldn't even know where to start with lilacs.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think that's probably somewhat, it's not typical. And getting back to the grafting, like you mentioned, apple with apple, basically looking at, you can put different cultivars on the same species. So if you could have different cultivars of lilac and graft them on, and they probably picked a good durable rootstock and then went by flower color or something else as far as what they grafted onto it. But it was probably a novelty kind of thing, and whether it's still available today commercially is hard to say. You could try it yourself, but But yeah, I don't know. Otherwise, look around online. Maybe some nursery's got some kind of product like that out there, but it's not typical.
No, it sure isn't. I was hearing it for the first time, kind of grafting that high up. It's interesting, which is all those questions that are hard to answer are interesting. Let's take another. Thanks, Karen, for calling. Let's take a question from the audience.
Yeah, I was just, I had a question. On average, how long does it take for a weeping willow to mature? And where are a couple good places to plant one?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
When we talk about maturity of a plant, we're talking usually about when it's going to produce seed. And I actually don't know when weeping willow is going to produce seed, but I do think I generally see them in open grown situations. So I think it tends to thrive most where there's a lot of light. So I would select a site that's pretty wide open. And then based on that mature crown width, we know these trees get really monstrous. So it's going to need plenty of space. But Bruce, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, just be careful. And willow's easy to grow, but be careful. Like you say, they need a lot of room, and the roots tend to be invasive. So check with your parents before you decide where to plant it.
I was thinking about one. We have one in our homestead, and you can't even get your arms. I mean, it's enormous, and I'm now viewing the possibility of having to cut that one down because it would certainly, if it goes, it'll probably go right over the top of the house. Yeah, on the old, not my place, but the old homestead. Let's take a question from the audience and then back to the phones.
Hi, I plant a lot of plants in pots inside my house, and I've talked about with my family a lot planting them in the ground, but we don't do that usually because they're worried they're going to die. So what is a good way to plant plants in the ground but make sure they don't go into shock, and what would be best for that?
Okay, excellent question. You want to be careful with your house plants. If they're tropical plants, they won't survive the winter outside. So usually in that case, if you're going to move them, for the summer, you can put them outside, but then you got to move them back in the fall. But as far as planting, if you're buying plants that grow outside, like shrubs or perennials, like roses or iris or whatever, normally you plant them at about the same depth they were growing in the pot when you got them. And again, go back to what I mentioned to the other questioner. Make sure the plant you pick, if it's a shady area, it's a plant that tolerates shade, and if it's sunny, vice versa. But there's a lot of good plants out there, relatively easy to plant. And then, like I said, the main thing is you want them at the same depth they were growing in the pot. That would be the main thing to look at.
Yeah, good questions. You're listening to Garden Talk today. Our three guests, Phil Brosh, co-owner of Bayfield Winery and Blue Ox Cider, Bruce Spangenberg, who is UW Extension statewide horticulture outreach specialist, Paul Segan, DNR forest health specialist. Paul works out of Hayward. I'm Larry Mealer for Garden Talk on WPR News. You're listening to Garden Talk. Great to have you listening in today, and great to have a great audience with us as we talk all things. Well, we covered practically anything you can think about with our three guests today, Phil Brosh, Bruce Spangenberg, and Paul Segan. Just a reminder, on Monday, we're going to be talking birds, and our bird expert, Bill Volkert, will be back with us for that. Before we take a call from take a phone call, I want to go back to the questioner from the audience who was talking about moving plants outside from the house, and maybe we probably should say something about hardening off or things that might help out in that way.
Yeah, and that actually, that's an excellent point. And hardening off goes in the spring and also in the fall. So the main thing hardening off right now is when you get, like tomato transplants or things from a greenhouse. If they go right from the greenhouse and you put them right out in your garden, it's a drastic change from that humid, perfect environment in the greenhouse to the drier air and more stress in the outdoors. So immediately that plant's going to wilt. So you want to gradually give it a couple hours outside, bring it back in, do that for a few days. Ideally transplant it in the shade if you can. I realize some of you probably just planted things a week ago. Now it's too late, but that helps with the stress. But then in the fall, the big thing is the big thing are house plants that people will put outside. Don't wait until all of a sudden you watch the 10 o'clock news and there's a frost forecast and quick rush them in the house, because they're going from an environment outside with plenty of light to an indoor environment for the winter where there's less light, drier air, that kind of thing. So you want to gradually move them back. And also check you don't bring any hitchhikers in, like aphids and things that might have been out there during the summer.
Just thinking back to the very first time I grew some tomato plants from seed, did everything the way you're supposed to. I had these nice plants, and then I went and stuck them out. And the next morning I go out there and they're laying flat and they're completely white. I mean, so then I went to the garden center and bought some new plants, and things worked better. So there you go. Well, let's take a call from Carol in Boscobel. Carol, hi.
Hi. I have it's called a magnolia tree, I guess. That's what they told me it was. And I've had it for about 10 years, and it has grew so big. It's probably 10 foot tall, 10 foot the other way. I was wondering, is there a time that I could trim that to make it look a little better? And I don't want to trim it when it's not the right time.
Yeah, is it flowering?
It's flowering now. It usually flowers a couple times a year in the summer.
Yeah. Spring and summer. Okay. Who wants to go with that one? Bruce?
I guess I am. Yeah, magnolia, I mean, and that's a problem you run into. It goes back to selecting. Sometimes you get a plant that, you plant a tree or shrub, and then you realize after 5, 6, 7 years that it's getting a little too big for the site. So you can prune to maintain size, with some limitation. So if you want, if that tree, like you said, is 10 feet in diameter, the canopy, and you want to make it 8 or 7 feet, you could do that. The basic rule as you cut back would be always cut back to a side branch or a side shoot. Don't just leave a stub. Pick out the branches that fit best for the overall structure. If there are some that are crossing, that kind of thing, you might choose to eliminate 1 or 2 of those as you go along. And I would probably wait till after it's done blooming and go ahead and do that. You should be okay. Basically, severe pruning like that, you want to make sure you get it done by about the 4th of July. If you do it later than that in the summer, sometimes you force new growth, and then especially a magnolia, it won't harden off properly for winter, so don't do late summer, but spring, early summer would be a suitable time for most of those trees like magnolias to do pruning on it.
All right. Thanks very much for that question. We've got some emails too. I haven't given any look at them, and I'm looking at them now, and there's quite a few of them. Greg in Spring Grove, Minnesota, emailed to say they have a 5-year-old Parker pear tree, and wants to know why would only one branch get blossoms? The rest of the branches look fine, but they don't flower. What do you think, Phil?
It could be it's young for pears, at least the ones we've worked with. Sometimes they're 5 to 7 years before they're really producing maturely. So that could be part of it, just being a younger age. But it would also be a good time to do a soil test and see if the tree's happy there. If it has everything it's needing, and it might just be low on certain nutrients that it's lacking. But yeah, our pears, we've had some, they're on 6 years, and they're pretty sparse for the beginning of its life. So that could be part of it too.
And let me give one more email here. Diane from south of Chicago emailed to ask if it's possible to graft some apples onto buckthorn trees. It's such a vigorous plant. But wondering if perhaps apples could benefit from this. Diane knows buckthorn is invasive, but they are sturdy. If growing apples on them isn't possible, she'll get rid of all of them. And good luck on getting rid of all of them. it's not an apple. It's not related to apples in my knowledge, Phil. And you were saying apples to apples.
Yeah, they definitely like to grow near them. Most of our old trees have buckthorn popping around all of them, and we have fields starting, so I wish it was manageable with that, because it's a hard one to get rid of in the area.
Yeah, so I think we're out of luck there. Tim in Menominee will give you a chance to join in. Hi, Tim.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for taking my call. My question is about my lawn. I guess the question is that it seems like I have a very sandy soil. When the builder put it down, I think they took a lot of the potable soil for growing out and puts a lot of sand in its place. So I've got a very spotty lawn. So I'm wondering, do I get the soil tested, or can I add stuff to the top of the lawn like peat and potting soil and then reseed? And the other part of that question is, I have some friendly animals in my neighborhood that tend to use my boulevard lawn as a urinal. So I'm assuming that's got to be nitrogen and ammonia. Is there anything I can put down after that lawn has been bleached white by their urine that could have it regrow? Thank you.
Okay, Bruce, we'll go to you for that.
Okay. The first question, dealing with the sandy soil. Yes, you can amend that soil, like you mentioned, peat moss, or you could just bring in a good loam soil that's got some organic matter in it. But ideally, what you'd like to do is rototill it into the existing soil. Now, I'm assuming you said your lawn is spotty. There's not. What % desirable turf do you think is there?
We lost him. Yeah.
Okay. So the decision you have to make if you're going to renovate, if you have like 60, 70% decent grass there, then you could do what we call top dressing. You could just take organic soil, put it in a fertilizer spreader, and just go right over your lawn with it. If you don't have much desirable grass, you're really better off just doing what we call total renovation, where you start over, either kill off that existing grass and weeds that are there, or just rototill everything under, add your organic matter. So sand, the big issue is it doesn't hold water. We see more of a problem with clay in lawns where it's the opposite. There's way too much water and the roots die. And the same thing there, you can amend the soil. But yeah, definitely amend it and then go ahead and overseed that or reseed it depending on how severe your renovation is. The dog issue, that is nitrogen. So what happens is where the grass is bleached, the grass was basically burned like you do with fertilizer. And then typically you see the dark green grass around there where you had extra nitrogen, but not so much that it burned the grass. There's really no remedy other than, number one, either keep the dog off or immediately after the dog's been there, douse that area with water just to dilute the nitrogen. But other than that, there were some articles written a few years back that talked about modifying the diet of your dog and all this. Don't do that. I mean, those kind of things are ridiculous.
Yeah, I was giving them tomato juice or something.
Yeah, don't mess with that.
There are people who will swear by it, but let's instead turn to another question from the audience.
Hi. I have a question and a comment. I'll start with a comment to the youngster who wants to plant a willow. I did when I was your age, and one was under the power line and the other was under the telephone line, and they cut them down.
So location is important, is what you're saying.
Yes. I have a question about not a tree, but a tree peony. And I moved them from Illinois 6 years ago, and they're still just surviving. They're buds right now. But can I amend the soil or do anything that could give them a little more? They were huge and vigorous down in Illinois.
Yeah, and peonies are difficult to move, especially if they've been in a site a long time. All peonies, not just the tree ones. So I would give it a little bit of time, but you might want to consider the soil test. Again, it's hard to say exactly what you got there, but ideally you'd like to have a slightly acidic soil if possible, but you really can't tell without a soil test. And then just kind of nurture them along, and it's not unusual for it to take several years before they really bounce back and go from there.
Thank you.
All right, let's take another question from the audience.
I know we've been talking a lot about the actual gardening part, but what are the trends in wines? What are the trends that you're seeing in the ciders?
With the different trends right now, I guess it's new again. There's what's called pet nat wine or cider. It's a method of carbonation. I'm going to butcher this. I'm never good at the French names, but it's also called method ancestral. It's the oldest method of fermentation in the world. So basically, when the tank is finishing fermentation, you're bottling it and letting it finish in the bottle. You have the sediment in there. You're not adding anything. You just let that process go. So you're seeing more of that around, which is fun. You get different flavors from that versus like the traditional method carbonation. It's much more fruit forward, which can work really well with things. So that's one that's going, and you see that in cider and wine. Another, which is exciting, we aren't able to do this for a while, but more fortified ciders. Pommeau is a really interesting one. It's about 18% alcohol. It's a sipping. Pour about 1.5 ounces of it. And you're taking a barrel of brandy, cutting it with fresh pressed juice down to about that 18%, and then you're aging that for a couple years. And I was at a cider conference this winter in Chicago and got to taste a lot of that from all over the world. We had stuff from Chile and all sorts of places. So that one's a fun new trend in cider as well, and someday we hope to play around with that a little bit.
Pretty cool.
And someday I hope we pair this radio show with a wine tasting, Larry.
We could do that.
That would be good.
Maybe we'll have to have Phil back next year. Bring along a couple of cases. Well, it'd take more than a couple. Good note, Paul. I'll keep that in mind. Let's take another question from the audience.
All right. This has to do with mostly apple trees, but it might apply to other fruit trees. The suckers on them, I always cut them off in the wintertime, like you're supposed to trim a tree in the wintertime, but I've recently heard that promotes more suckers. And if you cut them off in the summertime, that helps to limit them.
Cut back the suckers? Have you, what's your experience, Phil?
So definitely, at least in the apple world, in the winter, we're trying not to do more of about 30% of any size of tree, no more than 30%, because that it'll tell it to shoot out more suckers next year. It kind of puts the tree into panic mode. Some of those, we're actually going to be doing this year, where we had some trees that were pretty rough and we're getting them back into shape. We would have had to, I think about 40% needs to come off. So some of the big limbs we're saving for midsummer. So once the tree's spent the energy and already put out its new limbs, its new suckers, then we're going out. It'll probably be mid-July for us, and we'll be cutting off some pretty large limbs. So then it won't promote that suckering feeling. The angry tree syndrome is what it's sometimes called. So yeah, there definitely can be some effects from that, and you want to make sure you're not putting those stressors into it in the winter.
All right. Thank you for that. And let's take another call or take a question from the audience.
Hi, I'd love to add a fennel plant to my garden, but I have mixed information about how that affects surrounding plants.
I'm trying to think, does fennel release anything?
I'm not aware of it, and you have an answer for it? Oh, I'm not aware of fennel, having any allelopathy that, would release something that would hinder other plants, or the other side, is it invasive? I'm not aware of it being invasive either, but.
Yeah, I guess I've heard that it perhaps changes the flavor of plants around it, or somehow it was like plant it away from, I think I was told to plant it away from everything.
I'd have to look that one up. I'm not sure.
I haven't heard of that. I haven't heard that one. I've heard a lot, but I haven't heard that one. John in Green Bay will give you a chance. Hi, John.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to ask a question. How successful it would be to dig and transplant small balsams, no more than 1 to 2 feet tall, once the new growth has fully come out at this time of the year? Good idea, bad idea?
Yeah, with balsam, you can transplant them at this time, but the better time is late summer. at that point, it still gives the tree a chance to start to grow a little bit of a root system and harden off before the fall and the cold freeze happens. So I would actually wait until about sometime in August through maybe early September and try to get that done. Best times to plant conifers, generally early spring before we get that bud break, and then late summer, well, it still gives the tree a time to kind of acclimate, grow some roots, and become accustomed to that site before winter sets in.
Make sure you water them regularly and right up until frost.
Absolutely, yes. A later season planting definitely should be accompanied by watering.
Yeah. All right. Let's take another question from the audience.
I have a wildflower question, if that's allowed. Johnny jump ups. I haven't seen any this year, and I have usually by this time of year I've got them all over the place, and I don't see a one. And for years, I mean, they come back perennially. So, any ideas what's going on there?
No, you had a lot last year. And where are you located in the state?
In Washburn.
Washburn, yeah. Nothing rings a bell. I mean, sometimes when you see those things where not, any plant where for some reason you don't see it in a particular year. Again, it could go back to last season, something that happened, some event that altered their growth a little bit, and then maybe they're skipping this year essentially, and then they'll come back next year. I haven't heard anything.
Have you noticed them down the road a piece, or? I haven't seen any. No?
Yeah.
No? Okay. I'd probably wait a year and see what happens.
Yeah, it could be one of those weird things where it skips a year.
Jennifer in Fond du Lac, we'll go to you. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I have a pagoda dogwood. It's about 4 years old. And it has buds on it, but it's not leaving out, and it has new shoots with leaves, but the existing shrub itself isn't leafing out.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind with pagoda dogwood is a type of canker disease, a fungal disease that can grow on the stems and kill them. I think it's called dogwood golden canker. I've noticed it in my yard too, along the fringes where the pagoda dogwood grows wild. I think pruning out those dead branches can be important, but beyond that, I'm not sure.
Bruce?
The only other thing that came to mind is winter damage. If that new growth is all at the base, and then especially when she mentioned, buds that don't open or start to open and stop, that's usually classic winter damage where it goes back to what we talked about. The plant ran out of energy. It takes a tremendous amount of energy for a tree or shrub or even a perennial to come out of the ground in the spring. And if they don't have that energy stored up from the previous year, there's no way they can break bud because they don't have leaves yet to take in sunlight. So it could be the canker or, winter damage. In either case, like you say, cut out the dead stuff and see what happens with the new growth.
Let's take another email question. Sarah in Middleton emailed to say they have a redbud tree that's 3 to 4 years old. This spring, Sarah noticed the bark on the trunk peeling off. It continued to flower out and now has leaves, but the trunk doesn't look too good. She's wondering, what is this and is it terminal for that redbud?
It's not to keep repeating it, but it looks like winter damage or, redbuds are finicky also. They're naturally an understory tree, and a lot of times people plant them on a clay soil out in the sun, and it's just high stress on them and they really struggle. But just from what she described, it could be winter damage or even physical damage from an animal possibly, but kind of wait and see. It did flower out, which is good, but sometimes there's enough energy to flower out, and then if the trunk is damaged, that tree's going to go downhill. But keep an eye on it, water it during the summer, and hope for the best is about all we can tell you.
All right, let's take a question from the audience.
I have a question about my lawn. So it's really healthy, but there in some patches there's it's dead, and I was just wondering what are the best ways to have it grow back to normal again?
What do the patches look like? Are they round? Are they?
They're just big round patches, and it just looks like if the grass was in fall.
Okay. It's hard to say exactly what did that, but to answer your question, the best thing to do would be to just take a rake and rake that dead grass away, roughen up that soil surface, and then just put down some grass seed. Try to do that here pretty quick before we get too far into summer. What caused that is hard to say. It could have been something last summer that was there. Maybe it was a different type of grass that died over the winter, but the other thing to do as we go through the summer is just keep an eye on it. If you notice something unusual starting to happen, take some pictures of it. You can put it up on our website or ask a gardener, and someone will get back to you with an answer on that.
All right. Great question. Thank you so much for that. We are having some fun today on Garden Talk, talking with our three guests, Phil Broch, co-owner of Bayfield Winery and Blue Ox Cider, Bruce Spagenberg, UW Extension statewide horticulture outreach specialist, and Paul Segan, DNR forest health specialist in Hayward. Questions, you can give a call. The number is 800-642-1234, or you could email to talk@wpr.org. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Great to have you along for Garden Talk. Larry Mealer here. Just a quick mention, next week at this time, we'll hear from a great friend of mine, gardening expert Patty Nagai. We did lots of programs together, and we are continuing with those shows. And so she'll be on first, and then we'll talk to the author of a new book. It's called Water-Wise Gardening, Everything You Need to Know About Efficient Watering to Grow a Healthy Yard. So that's next week on Garden Talk. Right now, three great guests for you with a whole variety of experiences and expertise. So it's great to have them. And I think we have do we have a question from the audience? We do.
Me and my family have two apple trees, a crab apple tree and an apple tree that I don't know the name of. And I was just wondering if there were any diseases that are visible to an apple tree or a crab apple tree.
Definitely. Apple scab is a big one. It's a fungus, especially on wet years. It'll look kind of patchy on the apples and leaves. If it gets really bad, it can harm the apples and stunt their growth, and they won't ripen. It's not too common it'll go that far. Different apples are better at dealing with it. Fire blight's another one, especially right now around bloom time is when it's susceptible to that. And you'll get what they call the shepherd's crook. The leaves will kind of hang down in the shape of a shepherd's crook while they die. And that one's a viral disease. And with that, you usually cut back quite a bit and just remove it from the orchard. Don't have it near the other trees at all. But those are both really common ones that you'll see up here. I don't know if you guys have others to add, but
Those are the big two. But the other thing I'd suggest to all of you, you've got great questions from the middle school you're from. 4-H is available if you're not aware of it. Maybe talk with your teacher, but that's a great way. You can get into gardening and other things, houseplants, a number of projects through 4-H, through UW. So just to put a plug in for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take a call next. Jake in Mazamani, thank you very much for calling. What's on your mind?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to call. An earlier caller had mentioned having a lilac tree that she was looking to potentially replace and was struggling to find, and specifically that it was grafted just below the crown. I know a lot of the street tree lilacs you'll see are going to be Japanese lilac, which are grafted typically just down at the root, but a commonly top-grafted lilac would be Korean lilac on a standard, and they're actually quite easy to find. Hard to say without seeing her tree, but if it has a much more round or sort of almost ball-shaped crown, it's very likely that it's a Korean lilac standard, which is a Korean lilac shrub grafted onto the trunk of a Japanese lilac.
Interesting. Boy, Jake, thanks very much for calling. That's one I didn't know.
I'd like to propose a new guest for our radio show, Larry.
That was great, Jake. I have a Japanese lilac right outside my front porch, and love it. It's
great for small spaces.
Oh, it's great to sit out on the porch with a glass of something, especially when that's flowering, because it's really wonderful aroma. Yeah, for sure. Well, Jake, thank you. Let's go to Jack. Jack in Madison. Hi, Jack.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. My question is regarding walnut trees. My property in Madison abuts a park, and the park is surrounded by walnut trees, and they create such a fantastic canopy for our own property, but also for the park. And I was wondering ways to support and kind of keep this canopy going into the next generation. I think these walnut trees are about 70 years old, so I was wondering how I can support them and kind of keep the park or continue the fantastic shade of the park they offer.
Oh, thanks, Jack. A couple of possibilities here. Paul, do you want to start, and then we'll go to Bruce?
Yeah, when I think about managing the health of any tree, a deciduous tree like walnut, you're thinking about the basic cultural practices to keep it healthy. Things like mulching, things like avoiding too close a mower to the tree, things like watering during times of dry weather, and then also pruning that tree, getting it trimmed by a professional arborist if it's a large tree, and promoting that good crown structure to avoid weak spots, tight branch unions, things of that sort. And then if you've got some space in your yard, maybe consider taking up some of those nuts and maybe trying to grow them and plant them too to expand that little stand of walnut.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, anything to add there?
Pretty much what Paul said. A big thing there is avoid, big trees, avoid disrupting the root system. Walnuts, fortunately, are pretty durable trees, and a lot of times we get the opposite. People are concerned about them because it's tough to grow plants under them. But also starting some from seed would be a great way to keep them going for the next generation.
Let's take another email here. Connie in Economowalk emailed to say last fall they dug the soil from one side of a very prolific Carmine Jewel cherry bush in order to pull this and stake it into a more vertical position. This spring it has very few leaves and mostly bare branches. The branches are not dead. Is there any hope for future health, or should Connie just give up on this Carmine Jewel cherry bush? Well, Phil, if you got something, yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to figure that one out, just because, she said remove the soil a little bit under?
They dug the soil out from one side of this jewel that was very prolific, and then they kind of bent, I'm sure what they did was they tried to bend it back over that open area, and then probably put some more soil back on it. I'm reading a lot into these very short notes here, but that's what I'm guessing.
Yeah, they stress, shock, see what happens, but yeah.
And when you bend like that, you're going to you're going to do some damage to the roots on the other side as well.
Yeah, wait and see what happens, give it a few months.
Let's take another question from the audience.
So you were mentioning a little bit earlier about the drip line of the trees and mulching underneath the trees. So if I was going to do that in my yard where I have like a nice dozen trees, would I rototill the turf under, or would I remove the turf, dig out the turf, and then put the mulch on? Or how would you go about doing that?
Well, you wouldn't want to rototill because you don't want, most of the tree roots that are really important for water and nutrients are shallow, so you don't want to rototill under an established tree. But if you want to convert that to mulch and get rid of the grass, probably the best way to do it would be a one-time application of a non-selective herbicide that doesn't work in the soil, like Roundup or glyphosate. That would kill the grass, and you could put the mulch right over it. You wouldn't have to disrupt anything else. The problem, if you just spread mulch over grass, the grass is going to grow through the mulch, and you're going to have a headache, dealing with it. But you want to be real careful with those trees, not to disrupt. Your objective is to get the area mulched, but in the process, you don't want to disrupt the roots to get to that point. So simplest way would be to kill off the grass and then mulch it, just right over the dead grass.
Okay, here's an email. AJ emailed to ask, how difficult is it to transplant milkweed?
Well, usually it's propagated by seed. I would say take as much soil as you can not to disrupt the roots, and you should be able to move it. But normally it's a seeding kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mark in Eau Claire wonders why the DNR mows prairie grass in late summer and early fall. Doesn't have time to grow, and there's a reduced habitat for the wildlife.
I would think it has to do with stimulating the growth and sort of emulating the type of disturbance that the prairie has evolved with. Fire is a big one, also grazing is another, and we can achieve that with mowing. And so I'm not totally sure about the phenology, but I would guess it's probably timed in a manner that aims to produce good growth.
And a question from the audience.
Hi, I have a river birch in my yard, and we're going to be putting a garden in a couple of weeks, kind of close to it. And I'm wondering about a general rule of thumb about, as you mentioned earlier, no construction around it. Is there a rule regarding the height of the tree or anything river birch specific?
Yeah, there's a term when we're talking about disturbing the root system called the protected root zone. It's an area where we really don't want to have any disturbance, any subsurface disturbance, or not a whole lot of compaction on the top of the soil. And so that's usually about the drip line, the width of the canopy, the expanse of the branches you're seeing. So trying to stay away from that area. What would happen is you might run the risk if you install your garden close to there, even if it's raised beds, that those roots might start to invade those raised beds if they're sitting on top of the ground. I've had that happen with a big red maple in my yard, and I'm having to negotiate between the red maple and some of the garden beds through a lot of tilling, which I usually don't like to do. I like to do more non-till, but there's no way around it with those roots invading in. So staying out of that protected root zone will help the tree and probably make your garden more successful.
All right. Thanks for that question. And Bill in Lake Geneva wonders about the use of banana peels as fertilizer. How do you make it? Should it be applied directly to plants, and what plants would benefit the most? I just have a little concern about some of the banana peels with the materials.
There's a lot of that stuff. That stuff gets put online in different garden forums and that kind of thing. Your best thing when you're dealing with any kind of plant residue or remains, banana peels, whatever, you're better off composting it. Shred it up in compost to use it as a soil amendment. Then we know what to expect versus anytime you put something down fresh, whether it's for nutrients or whatever else, you just don't know what's going to happen. It's going to create some side effect. You could attract raccoons and other stuff. So you're better off composting it.
Thank you very much for that email. There have been lots and lots of good questions here today, and I just wanted to mention it takes a lot of people to bring you a broadcast like this live from Bayfield, and I want to thank our friends from the Bayfield Chamber of Commerce and the old Rittenhouse Inn for their hospitality. We could not have done this without the support of WPR's many friends. And I want to give a shout out to everybody here. Raise your hand. Tyler Ditter, one of our technical directors. The other two, Lee Rayburn and Kemper Mass. And Joel Patnaud. Oh, he hasn't come out from behind the... Come out, raise your hand, Joel Patnaud. He's been taking calls and emails. And of course, our PR director, Sarah Ashworth, our Northern Regional Manager, Molly Gardner, and Ellen Chicka, and Diane Nordell. I want to thank all of them, and of course, thank our guests today. It's been so much fun with Paul Stegan, with Phil Broch, and with Bruce Bagenberg. Thank you all so much for being with us. And thanks for a great audience. We'll be back. Stay with us. Lots more in store here on WPR News.